17 investment bankers stood in stunned silence as the most powerful man in New York finance dropped to his knees in front of the woman he'd publicly destroyed. Arjun Mira. The name alone commanded boardrooms from Wall Street to Midtown Manhattan. Heir to Mira Capital, a $2.3 billion investment firm that had shaped American finance for 3 generations. The man who'd never apologized to anyone in his 34 years of life was now on the marble floor of his own penthouse, tears streaming down his face, begging. But here's what made the moment impossible to look away from. The woman standing above him, Mira Kapoor, was the same woman he'd married specifically to ruin, the same woman he'd humiliated in board meetings, isolated from society, and systematically stripped of dignity for 18 brutal months. And now? Now she held everything. His reputation, his future, his last shred of hope. The power had shifted so completely, so devastatingly, that every witness in that room would spend years trying to understand how it happened. How does a man who marries for vengeance end up begging for love? How does a victim become a savior? Stay with me, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about power, pride, and the cost of redemption. Before we begin, if you appreciate the hours of research and writing that go into bringing you these powerful true stories, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Your support helps me keep bringing them to light. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Arjun Mira learned 3 things from his father before the old man died. Never show weakness, never forget a slight, and never let anyone outside your circle hold real power. By age 34, Arjun had turned those lessons into an empire. Mira Capital occupied 14 floors of a glass tower in Manhattan's financial district. The firm managed portfolios for billionaires, sovereign wealth funds, and old money families who'd trusted the Mira name since Arjun's grandfather arrived from Mumbai in 1967 with nothing but an accounting degree and relentless ambition. Arjun himself was everything you'd expect from generational wealth refined through American elite universities. Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA, tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a face that belonged on magazine covers, sharp jawline, calculating dark eyes, the kind of controlled intensity that made subordinates nervous and competitors careful. He'd never lost, not a major deal, not a hostile negotiation, not anything that mattered, until Kavya, his sister, 29 years old, brilliant, and heartbroken. Kavya had fallen for someone, a junior analyst at a competing firm. She'd brought him to a family dinner at their Westchester estate, nervous but hopeful. The young man was smart, respectful, clearly in love with her. He was also from Edison, New Jersey. His father worked at a manufacturing plant. His mother was a schoolteacher. Arjun's father had smiled politely through dinner, then delivered his verdict in private. Mira's don't marry down. Tell her to end it. Kavya had ended it. She'd cried for weeks. And when their father died 6 months later, she'd looked at Arjun with eyes that said, "You could have stood up for me. You could have said something." But Arjun hadn't, because Mira's don't marry down. The wound festered. Kavya moved to Boston, put an ocean of distance between herself and the family business. She was polite during their occasional phone calls, cold during the even rarer visits. And Arjun told himself it didn't matter. Business mattered. Legacy mattered. Sentiment was a luxury the wealthy couldn't afford. Then Mira Kapoor walked into his life. It started with a contract, a massive one. The Silver Lake Development Project, a $380 million luxury residential complex planned for Brooklyn's waterfront. 3 years in negotiation. Mira Capital had been positioned to secure the financing deal for 18 months. It was Arjun's project, his strategy, his carefully cultivated relationship with the developers. Then, In a single week, everything collapsed. The developers announced they'd chosen a different firm, a smaller operation, Insurgent Capital, a boutique investment group that had somehow, impossibly, undercut Mira's terms and offered better incentives. Arjun's first reaction was disbelief. His second was fury. The name attached to the winning proposal? Mira Kapoor, senior analyst at Insurgent Capital. Arjun had his team pull everything they could find on her. 28 years old. NYU Stern graduate. 3 years at Insurgent. Originally from Edison, New Jersey, the same town as Kavya's ex-boyfriend. Father was a high school math teacher. Mother had passed away when Mira was 16. She was everything the Mira family had taught him to look down on. Modest background, public university education, working at a firm that couldn't compete with Mira's prestige. And she'd just stolen his deal. The investigation took 4 days. Arjun's corporate lawyers dug deep, looking for any angle, any leverage. What they found was nothing. No insider trading, no breach of ethics, no smoking gun. Just better work, better terms, better strategy. But Arjun didn't see it that way. He saw theft. He saw disrespect. He saw someone from the exact background his family had rejected. Someone like the man who'd wanted to marry Kavya, humiliating him publicly. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile on the deal. Bloomberg featured Mira in their Rising Stars Under 30 segment. She was being celebrated, while he was being questioned by his own board about how he'd lost such a critical contract. His pride fractured. Then it metastasized into something darker: revenge. The plan formed over scotch in his penthouse, alone, staring at the Manhattan skyline that had always felt like his kingdom. He couldn't destroy her professionally, not without proof of wrongdoing that didn't exist. But he could destroy her personally. He could take the one thing women like Mira valued more than career success in their traditional families: reputation, marriage, social standing. He would marry her, court her publicly, sweep her into his world, make her believe she'd won the lottery. Then, once she was legally bound to him, once she'd left her firm and stepped into his life, he would systematically dismantle her. Public humiliation, social isolation, financial control. He would make her a prisoner in a gilded cage, and he would make sure everyone knew she'd failed to measure up to the Mira standard. It was cruel. It was calculated. It was exactly what his pride demanded. The courtship was a masterclass in deception. Arjun appeared at an industry gala where he knew Mira would be. Approached her directly. Congratulated her on the Silver Lake deal, with a smile that looked genuine. "You played that brilliantly," he said, offering his hand. "I'm impressed. Not many people can outmaneuver Mira Capital." Mira had looked at him with cautious surprise. She wasn't naive. She knew who he was, knew his reputation, knew this interaction was unusual. "I just did my job," she said carefully. "Better than most." He'd held her gaze. "I'd like to hear how you approached it. Perhaps over dinner." She'd hesitated. Every instinct probably screamed warning. But Arjun Mira was charming when he wanted to be. Disarming. He'd spent weeks learning everything about her, her favorite restaurants, her charitable interests, the fact that her father still lived in the same Edison house where she'd grown up. He played the role perfectly. Attentive, but not overbearing. Successful, but self-deprecating about the loss. Interested in her thoughts, her ambitions, her life beyond work. 3 weeks later, he'd asked her on a second date, then a third. By the second month, he'd taken her to meet industry contacts, introduced her at events, made it clear he was serious. Mira's colleagues were stunned. Friends warned her, "Arjun Mira doesn't date seriously, and he definitely doesn't date women who beat him at his own game. But Mira was brilliant, not naive. She'd asked him directly, one night over wine at his penthouse. "Why me, Arjun? Really, you could have anyone. And I took a deal you wanted. That doesn't add up." He'd looked at her with practiced sincerity. "Because you're the first person in years who's challenged me. The first person who didn't care about my last name or my money. You just worked harder. I respect that. Maybe I even needed it." It was a lie. Every word. But it was a lie, wrapped in just enough truth to be believable. 4 months after their first meeting, Arjun proposed. Not with flowers and privacy, with a carefully orchestrated plan, at another industry event, in front of 400 people, including her colleagues, his board members, and half of Manhattan's financial elite. He'd gotten down on one knee, pulled out a ring worth more than most people's houses, and asked her to marry him. The crowd had erupted. Cameras flashed. Social media exploded. And Mira, caught in the moment, overwhelmed by the spectacle, genuinely moved by what she believed was his sincerity, had said yes. The engagement period was short, 6 weeks. Arjun insisted on a quick wedding, citing business travel schedules and his desire not to wait. The truth? He wanted her locked in before she had time to think, before doubt could creep in, before anyone could convince her to run. Mira quit her job at Insurgent Capital 2 weeks before the wedding. It was expected. No conflict of interest between competing firms. She'd planned to take time to figure out her next move. Maybe consulting, maybe starting her own venture. Arjun encouraged it. "Take your time, explore options. You don't need to rush into anything." Another lie. Because the moment she walked down that aisle, her options would disappear. The wedding was held at the Plaza Hotel. 300 guests. A ceremony that cost more than Mira's father had earned in a decade of teaching. Mira's father, Vijay Kapoor, sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, clearly overwhelmed by the opulence. He'd tried to offer to pay for part of the wedding, a gesture Arjun had dismissed with patronizing generosity. "Please, sir, this is my gift to your daughter. You've given me something priceless. Let me handle the details." Vijay had nodded, grateful, unaware that Arjun's words carried an entirely different meaning. Kavya attended. She'd flown in from Boston. Still distant, still carrying that look of quiet disapproval whenever she glanced at her brother. She'd met Mira briefly at the rehearsal dinner, studied her with calculating eyes, then said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing." Mira had smiled, confused. "I love him." Kavya hadn't responded. She'd just looked at Arjun across the room with an expression that said, "I see exactly what you're doing, and you're going to regret this." But Arjun didn't care. His plan was in motion, unstoppable. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Mira wore a custom lehenga in deep red and gold, traditional and stunning. Arjun wore a sherwani that cost $15,000. They exchanged vows in Sanskrit, then again in English, for the American guests. When the officiant pronounced them married, Arjun kissed his new wife and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2, the destruction, would begin immediately. The reception stretched into the early morning hours. Champagne flowed. A live band played. Important people congratulated Arjun on his beautiful bride, and whispered behind their hands about how unexpected this match was. Mira danced with her father, tears in her eyes, believing this was the happiest day of her life. Arjun watched from the head table, already planning her first humiliation. It would happen in 3 days, a board meeting, a decision about staffing, a moment where Mira would suggest something reasonable, something she'd always been able to suggest at Insurgent, and Arjun would shut her down publicly, coldly, in front of 15 senior executives. Not because her idea was bad, because he needed her to understand the new rules. She wasn't an equal here. She wasn't a colleague. She wasn't even really his wife. She was his revenge, and he would savor every moment of watching her realize it. The first time Arjun humiliated Mira publicly, she thought it was a mistake. They'd been married for 3 days. The honeymoon, a week in the Maldives that Arjun had canceled, claiming urgent business matters, never happened. Instead, Mira found herself in the Mira Capital conference room on a Tuesday morning, sitting in on what Arjun called a routine strategy meeting. 15 senior executives, all men except for 2 women, one of them Arjun's cold-eyed CFO, the other a corporate attorney who looked like she'd perfected the art of never smiling. Mira had been introduced as my wife, who'll be observing as she transitions into understanding our operations. Observing, not participating. The word should have been her first warning. 20 minutes into the meeting, the discussion turned to a potential acquisition, a mid-sized firm specializing in sustainable energy investments. The numbers looked solid, but the timeline was aggressive. Mira had spent 3 years analyzing exactly these kinds of deals at Insurgent. She recognized the risk factors immediately: regulatory delays, market volatility in the renewable sector, over-optimistic revenue projections. She'd waited for a natural pause in the conversation, then spoken up. Politely, professionally. The projected ROI assumes federal tax credits that aren't guaranteed past 2025. If those expire, the returns drop by 38%. We should build contingencies into the offer price. The room had gone silent. Every executive had turned to look at her, then at Arjun. Arjun had leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was pleasant, almost kind. Mira, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're not familiar with how we operate here. We have analysts who handle the technical details. Your job right now is to learn by listening. The dismissal was gentle, but it landed like a slap. One of the senior VPs had smirked. The CFO had looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Mira's face had flushed hot. I was just... I know. Arjun had smiled. The smile never reached his eyes. And it's sweet. But let's let the professionals handle this, okay? Sweet. Like she was a child playing dress-up in the adult world. She'd nodded, mortified, and spent the rest of the meeting staring at her hands while the deal moved forward. With the exact flaws she'd identified. Flaws that would cost Mira Capital $4.7 million. When those tax credits expired 18 months later. But by then, Arjun wouldn't care about the money. He'd gotten what he wanted. Mira's first taste of powerlessness. The humiliations became systematic, calculated, escalating. At a charity gala 2 weeks later, one of the major social events of the season, Arjun had introduced Mira to a circle of Manhattan's elite wives. Women who ran foundations, sat on museum boards, controlled access to the social circles that mattered. This is my wife, Mira, he'd said smoothly. She's still adjusting to New York society. She's from New Jersey originally. The way he'd said New Jersey made it sound like a third-world country. One of the women, a blonde in a dress that cost more than a car, had smiled with practiced politeness. Oh, how quaint. What did your family do? My father's a teacher, Mira had said, lifting her chin, refusing to be ashamed. A teacher. The woman had exchanged glances with her friends. Well, that's important work. Very noble. The subtext was clear. Noble, meaning poor, meaning irrelevant. Arjun had stood there, silent, offering no defense, no pushback, just watching Mira absorb the condescension like it was exactly what she deserved. Later that night, in the car ride home, Mira had finally broken. "Why didn't you say anything? They were what?" Arjun's voice was cold. "Honest? Mira, these are the circles we move in now. If you can't handle basic social conversation, maybe you should spend less time at events and more time learning how things work." She'd stared at him, searching for the man who'd courted her, the man who'd said he respected her, the man who'd gotten on one knee in front of 400 people. He was gone, or maybe he'd never existed. "I don't understand what's happening," she'd whispered. "You're treating me like I'm nothing." Arjun had looked at her then, really looked at her, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or the ghost of a conscience. But he'd crushed it. "Because Miras don't show weakness. You're my wife," he'd said flatly. "That's what you are, and that's all you need to be." The financial control came next. Mira had her own savings, $140,000 she'd accumulated over 3 years of disciplined work at Insurgent Capital. It wasn't Mira money, but it was hers. Her security, her independence. 1 month after the wedding, Arjun had suggested, casually, over breakfast, that she consolidate their finances. "It makes sense. Simplifies taxes. And honestly, with my portfolio managers, your money will grow faster in our investment vehicles." She'd hesitated. "I'd like to keep some accounts separate, just for my own peace of mind." "Separate?" He'd set down his coffee. "We're married, Mira. What's the point of separate accounts? Unless you're planning to leave?" The question had hung there, loaded with accusation. "No, of course not. Then trust me. Let me take care of you." The words "take care of you" sounded like a threat. But she'd signed the papers, transferred her accounts, let him absorb her financial independence into his empire. 2 weeks later, she'd tried to make a donation to her father's school. $5,000 for new computer equipment. The card was declined. She'd called the bank, confused. The representative had been apologetic, but clear. "Your account requires secondary authorization for transactions over $500. You'll need to speak with Mr. Mira." Secondary authorization. Like she was a child. Like her own money, now their money, wasn't hers to spend. She'd confronted Arjun that night. He'd barely looked up from his laptop. "It's standard practice for accounts of this size. Prevents fraud. It prevents me from accessing my own funds. Our funds. And I'm not saying you can't spend money, Mira. I'm saying large expenditures need discussion. It's called being responsible. $5,000 for my father's school is responsible? Your father's school is a black hole. He's been teaching there for 30 years, and they're still broke. Throwing money at it won't change anything." The casual cruelty of it had stolen her breath. "That's my family you're talking about, and this is my family's money you're spending." She stood there, shaking, realizing the cage had closed completely. No job, no independent income, no access to funds without his approval. Trapped. But Mira Kapoor hadn't survived her mother's death at 16, hadn't worked her way through NYU on scholarships and part-time jobs, hadn't built a career in one of the most competitive industries in America by being someone who broke easily. She was terrified. She was humiliated. She was isolated. But she wasn't destroyed. Not yet. The shift began quietly, almost invisibly. Mira started spending time at the Mira Capital offices, not in meetings anymore, not trying to contribute where she wasn't wanted, but in the common areas. The break room, the lobby. She talked to people, the assistants, the junior analysts, the facilities staff who kept the 14 floors running. She learned names, asked about families, remembered birthdays. There was a young analyst named Priya, 24, fresh out of Columbia. brilliant, but struggling with imposter syndrome in the cutthroat environment. Arjun barely knew she existed. Mira had coffee with her once a week, listened to her ideas, offered gentle feedback, encouraged her. There was a janitor named Carlos, 53, supporting 3 kids on his salary, taking night classes to finish his degree. Arjun had never spoken to him directly in 6 years. Mira learned his schedule, brought him lunch sometimes, helped him with his English homework. Small acts, invisible to Arjun, but building something. 3 months into the marriage, Mira Capital faced a crisis. A major client, a family office managing $600 million, threatened to pull their entire portfolio. The patriarch had died, and his daughter, who just inherited control, was furious about losses in a recent tech sector downturn. The account represented 12% of Mira Capital's assets under management. Losing it would be catastrophic. Arjun had assigned his top relationship managers to fix it. They'd failed. The daughter, Simran Patel, 36, Stanford MBA, no patience for incompetence, refused to meet with them. Send someone who actually gives a damn about more than their bonus, she told them. Or I walk. The senior team had been in panic mode for a week when Priya, the young analyst Mira had befriended, mentioned it during one of their coffee meetings. We're going to lose the Patel account, Priya had said, exhausted, and when we do, there'll be layoffs. I've only been here 8 months. I'll be first on the list. Mira had thought for a moment, then asked, what does Simran Patel care about? What matters to her beyond returns? I don't know. Legacy. Her father built that wealth supporting South Asian entrepreneurs. She's passionate about representation, about not just what the portfolio looks like. Mira didn't ask Arjun's permission. She'd learned by now that asking meant automatic rejection. She'd simply called Simran Patel's office directly, introduced herself as someone who knew her father's work, and requested a meeting. Simran had agreed. Curious, maybe, or just intrigued by someone approaching from outside the usual corporate playbook. They'd met at a coffee shop in Soho. 2 women, no corporate armor, no power plays. Mira had been honest. I'm not here to sell you on staying with Mira Capital. I'm here because I think you're making a decision based on the wrong metrics. Simran had raised an eyebrow. Go on. Your father didn't build wealth just to watch numbers go up. He built it to create opportunity, to fund businesses that banks ignored, to prove that people from our communities could compete. Mira had leaned forward. The tech losses hurt, but tech funds are down across the board. What matters is whether Mira Capital still shares your father's vision. And honestly, I don't think the current leadership does. It was a risk, a massive one, criticizing Arjun's firm while representing it. But Simran had seen something in Mira's eyes. Integrity, maybe, or shared frustration with systems that measured everything except what mattered. What would you do differently? Simran had asked. Mira had spent the next hour outlining a strategy. Redirect a portion of the portfolio toward impact investing, support minority-owned businesses, create mentorship programs, measure success not just in returns, but in opportunity created. It was everything Arjun would have dismissed as soft and unprofitable. It was also everything Simran's father had believed in. 2 days later, Simran Patel had called Arjun directly. I'm keeping my portfolio with Mira Capital on one condition. Mira Kapoor runs my account. Arjun had been stunned, then suspicious, then furious. He'd confronted Mira that night at home, his controlled facade finally cracking. You went behind my back, contacted a client directly. Do you have any idea how inappropriate that is? I saved the account. You undermined me. I did my job, something you won't let me do in board meetings, so I found another way. His hand had slammed on the kitchen counter. You work for me now. You'll follow my rules. You don't. I don't work for you, Arjun. Her voice was quiet, steady. I'm your wife, not your employee, and certainly not your property. He'd stared at her, breathing hard. And for the first time since the wedding, Mira had seen something in his eyes that wasn't contempt. Fear. Because the power was shifting, slowly, invisibly, and he couldn't stop it. Over the next 6 months, Mira transformed from a humiliated wife into something else entirely. She took control of the Patel account and delivered results, not just financial returns, but measurable social impact. Other clients noticed. Some requested her specifically. She continued building relationships throughout the firm. When budget cuts threatened the facility's staff, she'd argued for their positions in a memo that went viral internally, earning her quiet respect from employees who'd watched Arjun treat her like an inconvenience. She started a weekly volunteer program, Mira Capital Staff, spending time with underprivileged students interested in finance. It wasn't Arjun's idea. It wasn't company policy. It was hers. And people loved it. The media noticed too. A profile in Forbes, Mira, redefining impact in finance. Another in Fortune, how one woman is changing Wall Street from the inside. Arjun's name barely appeared in either article. But while Mira rose, Arjun's empire began to crack. It started with Marcus Webb, his CFO, his trusted advisor for 8 years, the man who'd helped build Mira Capital's reputation. Marcus had been embezzling, slowly, carefully. Small amounts, skimmed across hundreds of transactions, hidden in complex derivative positions. $34 million over 4 years. The SEC discovered it during a routine audit. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. By noon, Mira Capital's stock had dropped 18%. By Friday, 3 major clients had pulled their accounts. Arjun had trusted Marcus completely. Never questioned him. Never audited the books personally. His father's first lesson, never show weakness, had made him blind to betrayal from within. The second crack came from a hostile takeover attempt. Redstone Partners, a rival firm Arjun had publicly humiliated 2 years earlier, launched an aggressive bid to acquire Mira Capital at a severely undervalued price, exploiting the chaos from the embezzlement scandal. Arjun fought back, called in favors, leveraged relationships, burned through cash reserves, defending his position, but the board was fracturing. Several members, old family friends who'd sat on the board for decades, started questioning his leadership, quietly suggesting maybe it was time for new direction. The man who'd never lost anything was losing everything. And the only person still standing strong, still earning respect, still holding pieces of his world together, the wife he'd married to destroy. Family, pause here. Have you ever watched someone's arrogance become their downfall? Have you seen pride destroy what compassion might have saved? Drop a comment if you've witnessed this kind of reversal, because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about redemption. The empire collapsed in stages, slowly enough that Arjun could watch every piece fall, quickly enough that he couldn't stop any of it. Redstone Partners' hostile takeover succeeded on a cold November morning, 14 months after Arjun had married Mira with vengeance in his heart. The final board vote was 8-4. 8 board members, men who'd known his father, who'd attended his wedding, who'd smiled and shaken his hand at galas, voted to sell Arjun Mira, the man who'd controlled a $2.3 billion investment firm, was out. The severance package was generous by normal standards, $8 million, non-compete clause, dignified exit. But for someone who'd grown up with generational wealth, who'd never known what it felt like to not have unlimited access to capital. It was annihilation. The penthouse, mortgaged to defend against the takeover, had to be sold. The Westchester estate, leveraged for emergency liquidity, went into foreclosure proceedings. The car collection, the art, the watch collection that had taken his father 30 years to build, all of it liquidated to cover debts and legal fees. Within 6 months, Arjun Mira went from the top of Manhattan's financial elite to a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown that he could barely afford. The fall would have destroyed most men. But the worst part, the part that truly broke him, wasn't the money. It was the loneliness. Everyone disappeared. The board members who'd voted against him stopped returning calls. The business contacts who'd laughed at his jokes at parties suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The men who'd called themselves his friends, relationships built on power and proximity, evaporated like they'd never existed. His sister Kavya called once. Her voice was carefully neutral. "I heard about the takeover. I'm sorry." "Are you?" Arjun had asked, bitterly. "You've been waiting for this. Waiting for me to fail." Silence. Then, quietly, "No, Arjun, I've been waiting for you to become human. There's a difference." She'd hung up before he could respond. The media coverage was brutal. Bloomberg, Mira Capital Falls, how pride preceded the ultimate collapse. Wall Street Journal, Arjun Mira's downfall, a case study in leadership failure. Forbes, from billionaire heir to cautionary tale, the Mira empire unravels. Every article dissected his mistakes, the embezzlement he'd missed, the hostile takeover he couldn't prevent, the toxic culture that had driven away talented employees. Some articles mentioned Mira, how she'd been the only bright spot in Mira Capital's final year, how clients had specifically requested her, how employees had respected her while resenting him. Reading those articles felt like swallowing glass. Through all of it, the takeover, the bankruptcy proceedings, the public humiliation, Mira had stayed. Not because she had to. She'd had options by then. Multiple firms had reached out, offering positions. Simran Patel had offered to fund Mira's own investment firm. She could have walked away, started fresh, left Arjun to drown in the consequences of his cruelty. But she hadn't. She'd moved with him to the smaller apartment, sold her jewelry to help cover legal fees, quietly used her network to find him consulting opportunities that he was too proud to pursue. Arjun couldn't understand it. He'd spent 18 months systematically humiliating this woman, stripping away her dignity, treating her like property. Why was she still here? He'd asked her once, late at night, after another rejection from a former colleague who wouldn't even take his call. "Why haven't you left?" Mira had looked up from her laptop. She was working on a proposal for an impact investment fund, building her own future while his crumbled. "Because I made a commitment," she'd said simply. "And because I'm not you." The words had cut deeper than any insult, pages backwards. The breaking point came 7 months after the takeover. Arjun had been applying for positions, senior roles at mid-tier firms, consulting gigs, anything that would restore some semblance of his former status. Every application had been rejected. His reputation was toxic. The embezzlement scandal, a hostile takeover, the stories from former employees about his leadership style. It all followed him like a shadow. He'd been walking through Columbus Circle one afternoon when he'd run into David Chen, a former colleague, someone who'd been a groomsman at his wedding. "Arjun," David had seemed genuinely surprised. "I heard you were. How are you?" The pity in his voice had been unbearable. "Fine. Great, actually. Working on some new ventures." "That's good. That's really good." David had glanced at his watch. "Listen, I'm late for a meeting, but we should grab coffee sometime." It was the universal lie, the polite dismissal. David had started to walk away, then stopped. turned back. Hey, how's Mira? I heard she's launching her own fund. That's incredible. And there it was, the question that really mattered. Not how Arjun was doing, how Mira was doing. Because Mira was succeeding, Mira was respected. Mira was everything Arjun had once been and could never be again. She's good, Arjun had managed. Tell her I said congrats. She deserves it. Honestly, she deserves better than. David had caught himself. Anyway, take care, man. Better than what? Better than you? Arjun had stood there on the sidewalk, people rushing past him like he was invisible, and felt something inside him finally shatter. Pride. The last piece. The thing he'd clung to through everything. It broke. He'd gone home, to the small apartment that smelled like the Thai restaurant downstairs, with furniture from IKEA instead of Italian designers, and found Mira at the kitchen table reviewing contracts. She'd looked up when he came in. Her face had softened with concern. "Are you okay? You look—" "I'm sorry." The words came out broken, raw. Mira had frozen. "What?" "I'm sorry. For everything. For all of it." He'd stood there in the doorway, this man who'd never apologized to anyone, and felt 18 months of cruelty crash over him like a wave. "I married you to destroy you. I humiliated you. I controlled you. I treated you like you were nothing because I wanted revenge for something you didn't even do. And you stayed. You stayed through all of this, and I don't understand why." Mira had set down her pen slowly. Her eyes were unreadable. "You want to know why I stayed?" He'd nodded, not trusting his voice. "Because I saw who you could be. Underneath all the arrogance and cruelty, I saw glimpses of someone capable of more. Someone who'd been taught all the wrong lessons by a father who measured worth in dollars and power." She'd stood, walked toward him. "And because I know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated like your background defines your value, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even you. I don't deserve your compassion." "No," she'd agreed quietly, "you don't. But that's the thing about compassion, Arjun. It's not about what people deserve. It's about who we choose to be." He'd stared at her, this woman he'd tried to break, who'd become stronger while he'd fallen apart, and felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel before. Shame. Real, crushing, inescapable shame. "I don't know how to fix this," he'd whispered. "I don't know how to be better." "Then learn." She'd crossed her arms. "Start by being honest. About what you did. About why you did it. About what you've learned." The first step was the hardest. Arjun started therapy, not because he wanted to, but because Mira insisted. "You need to understand why you hurt people," she'd said, "before you can stop doing it." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a clinical psychologist in her 50s with zero tolerance for self-pity, had been brutally direct from their first session. "You used your wife as a weapon against your own pain," she'd told him. "Your sister's heartbreak, your father's rejection, your fear of not living up to an impossible standard. Instead of dealing with any of it, you projected it onto someone innocent. I know that now. Knowing isn't enough. You need to feel it. Sit with the damage you caused. Let it hurt." So he did. Week after week, session after session, he forced himself to examine every cruel decision, every humiliation, every moment he'd chosen pride over decency. It was excruciating, but it was necessary. The second step was public. Mira had been invited to speak at a Women in Finance conference, a major event, 500 attendees, live-streamed to thousands more. She'd been asked to discuss her success, her impact investing approach, her journey. The night before the conference, She'd turned to Arjun. "I'm going to tell the truth. About us. About what you did." His stomach had dropped. "Mira, not to humiliate you, not for revenge, but because other women need to hear it. They need to know that success doesn't protect you from abuse, that marriage can be a weapon, that they're not alone." He'd wanted to beg her not to. Every instinct screamed to protect himself, his reputation, what little he had left. But he learned something in 7 months of therapy, 7 months of watching Mira build something real while he rebuilt himself from nothing. Her truth mattered more than his comfort. "Okay," he'd said quietly. "Tell them." Mira's speech became legendary. She'd stood on that stage, poised, powerful, unflinching, and told 500 people exactly what her marriage had been. "I was married as an act of revenge. My husband saw me as a threat to his pride, and he used marriage as a weapon to destroy me. He humiliated me in board meetings. He controlled my finances. He isolated me from my career and my independence. And for 18 months, I endured it while building my own strength in the shadows." The audience had been silent, absolutely silent. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because power doesn't have to come from cruelty. Because the man who tried to destroy me is now the man who's learning to become better. Not because I forgave easily, I haven't. Not because love conquers all, it doesn't. But because change is possible when someone chooses humility over pride." She'd paused. "My husband is here today. He's sitting in the back row. He's here because I asked him to hear this, to face what he did publicly, to own it. And that choice to show up, to listen, to be accountable, that's where redemption starts." Arjun had sat in that back row, tears streaming down his face, while 499 people turned to stare at him. The humiliation was complete, public, inescapable, and it was exactly what he deserved. After the conference, something shifted in the public narrative. Articles appeared. Arjun Mehra's public accountability. Can abusers really change? Think pieces. Mira's radical approach to redemption. Not everyone was convinced. Many people, rightfully, argued that Mira owed Arjun nothing, that staying with an abuser sent the wrong message, that forgiveness was overrated. Mira addressed it in a follow-up interview. "I didn't stay for him, I stayed for me, because walking away would have meant letting his cruelty define my story. I chose to define it myself. That doesn't mean other women should stay. It means we all get to choose our own path to healing." It was nuanced, complicated, human, just like real life. 9 months after the conference, Mira officially launched her own firm, Kapoor Impact Investments. She'd raised $200 million from investors who believed in her vision, profitable returns combined with measurable social impact. Simran Patel was her first major client. 3 others followed within weeks. The launch party was held in a Soho loft, nothing like the opulence of Arjun's old world, but filled with people who genuinely respected Mira's work. Arjun attended, not as a co-founder, not as a partner, as a guest, one among many. He'd watched her give the opening speech, confident, brilliant, finally free to build the career she'd always been capable of, and felt something he'd never experienced before. Pride, not in himself. In her. After the speeches, after the toasts, after most guests had left, Mira had found him standing alone by the windows overlooking the city. "You stayed," she'd said. "You invited me. I didn't think you'd come. Being here, watching me succeed while you're..." "Oh," she trailed off. "While I'm what? Consulting for mid-tier firms? Living in a rental apartment? Starting over at 35? He turned to face her. "I needed this, Mira. I needed to lose everything. to understand what you tried to tell me 18 months ago, that worth isn't measured in dollars or power, that the people I dismissed, people like you, like your father, like everyone I thought was beneath me, they were the ones with real strength all along. Mira had studied him carefully. Do you mean that? Or is this another performance? I mean it. He'd taken a breath. I don't expect you to love me. I don't expect you to trust me. I've destroyed any right to either. But I want you to know, if I could go back, if I could undo every moment of cruelty, every humiliation, you can't. Her voice was firm but not unkind. We can't undo the past. We can only decide what we do with it. Then tell me what you need from me to feel safe, to feel respected, to feel like this, he gestured between them, is something worth keeping. She'd been quiet for a long time. Then, I need you to keep showing up, to therapy, to accountability, to becoming someone who doesn't need power to feel valuable. Can you do that? Yes. Even when it's hard, even when you want to fall back into old patterns. Especially then. Mira had nodded slowly. Then we have a chance. Not a guarantee, a chance. The final scene happened 6 months later. Arjun had been offered a position, Director of Ethical Investment Practices at a mid-sized firm. Not prestigious, not powerful, but meaningful, working to prevent the kind of toxic culture he'd created at Mira Capital. He'd accepted immediately. The night he got the offer, he'd come home to their apartment. They'd moved to a slightly larger place in Brooklyn, nothing fancy but theirs, and found Mira cooking dinner. Not ordering from a restaurant, not having staff prepare meals, actually cooking. She'd looked up when he came in. You're smiling. What happened? He'd told her about the job, about the work, about the chance to actually make amends by helping other companies avoid his mistakes. Mira had listened, then set down the spoon she'd been using to stir pasta. I'm proud of you. 4 words. Simple. Honest. They'd broken him completely. Arjun had dropped to his knees right there in their small kitchen. Not dramatically, not for show, but because his legs literally couldn't hold him anymore under the weight of what those words meant. I don't deserve that, he'd said, voice shaking. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve this second chance. Mira had knelt down beside him, taken his face in her hands. You're right. You don't deserve it, but I'm not giving you what you deserve. I'm giving you what I choose to give, and what I'm choosing is to build something new, with a man who's learning to be better. Not perfect, not redeemed, just better. I love you. The words came out raw, desperate. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how I went from hating you to this, but I do. I love you. She'd smiled then, sad but genuine. I know, but love isn't enough, Arjun. It never was. What matters is the work. Every day, the choice to be kind when it's easier to be cruel, to be honest when it's safer to lie, to lift up instead of tearing down. I'll do the work, I promise. Then get up. She'd stood, offered him her hand. We have dinner to finish, and a life to build, one day at a time. He'd taken her hand. Let her pull him to his feet. The man who'd married to destroy had been destroyed. And in that destruction, he'd found something he'd never known he needed. Humility, real connection, the possibility of becoming someone worth the second chance he'd been given. Family, let me leave you with this. Sometimes the people we hurt the most become the people who save us. Not because they owe us redemption, not because forgiveness is required, but because some people choose compassion even when cruelty would be easier. This story teaches us that power built on pride always collapses, that the person you dismiss might be the person who holds your future, and that transformation, real, bone-deep change, only happens when we lose everything we thought defined us. Arjun lost his empire, his money, his status, everything that made him feel powerful. And in losing it all, he found the one thing he'd never had: humanity. Mira didn't owe him forgiveness. She didn't owe him a second chance. But she chose to offer both, not because he deserved them, but because she refused to let his cruelty define who she became. If this story moved you, if it made you think about power, pride, and the cost of redemption, hit that like button. If you believe in second chances earned through real change, comment redemption below. And if you want more stories about people who fall, rise, and learn what truly matters, subscribe to this channel. I spend hours researching and crafting these stories. Every like, every comment, every subscription tells me you want more. Help me keep bringing these powerful stories to light. Remember, you are more than your worst mistakes. You are capable of growth, even after catastrophic failure. And you are never too powerful to learn humility. Until next time, family, keep choosing growth, keep choosing accountability, and keep believing that even the most broken things, including people, can be rebuilt into something honest and real.